Hello, and welcome to today's roundtable discussion on the White House Conference on Hunger, Health, and Nutrition. I'm your moderator today, Aaron Vega. I'm currently the Director of the Planning and Economic Development for the City of Holyoke. Previous to that, I was a state representative for the City of Holyoke for 8 years and had the great honor of working with everyone or their bosses at this table today in addressing not just food insecurity, food access, and really the food economy at whole. So we have a great panel here today. We have a great discussion ahead of us. So let me start by allowing our panelists to introduce themselves, starting off with our friend Liz.
Hi, I'm Liz Ogilvie. I serve as the director of the Springfield Food Policy Council and sit on the Massachusetts Food System Collaborative.
Wonderful. My name is Dr. Christina Royal. I'm president of Holyoke Community College.
I'm Christina Maxwell. I'm the Director of Programs at the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts.
I'm Koby Gardner-Levine. I'm the Regional Manager for Congressman Jim McGovern. I run his Northampton office.
And I'm Monte Belmonte, a radio host at 93.9 The River in Northampton, Massachusetts, and anti-hunger advocate.
Well said. And please relay all of our thanks to the Congressman. We appreciate everything he does, and we look forward, obviously, to seeing him on the walk in just a few weeks to raise those much-needed dollars for the Food Bank of Western Mass. And so, again, thank you, everyone, for being here. Amazing, this long overdue conference that the White House has on food insecurity and hunger. Long overdue. And we know that the Congressman, among others, have been pushing this conversation for a long time and trying to get done what can be done. Some pretty lofty goals, perhaps set by the administration, perhaps not so lofty, where if you view it from Massachusetts, which we'll talk about. But we're lucky that two of you were actually there. Two representatives on our panel today were actually there. So maybe we can hear a little bit about what that conference was like, and maybe just start to talk a little bit about what were the major takeaways, and maybe from your perspective, what was missing. And then we'll open it up to the rest of us to talk about that. But Liz, you were there. What was it like?
I mean, it was powerful for me. I grew up in a food insecure, or as I prefer to remind us, a hunger-filled household, and was a commodities kid before the last conference. And food stamps came out of that conference. So I was struck with the auspiciousness of the moment and like, what did it mean for me as someone who was historically poor and Black in the United States and in this Commonwealth to be there for that moment. And I was hopeful, and I was downhearted. I was struck by how people are hungry all across these United States, and disproportionately, it's people of color. But, you know, meeting people from North Dakota and South Dakota, where everyone seems to be white, and hearing that they were struggling with the same challenges that we're struggling with here in our little state, I was struck by both the opportunity of the moment, but also the sense of how big what feels like to me a very simple problem is and how deep it is. Representative McGovern is all of our heroes, whether I live here in Hampden County, and I would say that he's not my representative, but he definitely is. Like, to pull that off, and it was just really incredibly powerful. And then our friend Monte was sitting behind me. I was really proud of Massachusetts. I was really proud of the legislative delegation, the state level from our state who were there. These are the people who I talk to and work with on a regular basis, our food caucus, Senator Comerford and Senator Kane and Speaker Domenico. It was really powerful to be sitting there with them as peers. You know, that was how they spoke to me. And so I came away with this sense of possibility, but also the sense of it's getting worse. It's spreading and it's deeper, the challenge of making sure that we are helping people access food in a sustainable way.
Absolutely, and not getting easier with rising prices and everything else happening. And I think it's important, Liz, and I thank you to share our stories, you know, because I remember, you know, when food stamps really were food stamps, they weren't the card, and Mom and I would sit there on Sundays watching TV, putting the food stamps in the booklet, and, you know, this is real for a lot of us that have grown up with it, and Liz mentioned, you know, the last conference is where food stamps kind of came out of in that whole program. Just for reference, the last conference about food insecurity and food hunger done by the White House was 1969. Monte, what was your take when you were there?
It was an honor to be asked to come. I was mostly going to cover it for the radio station and sort of a jumping off point for the ridiculous publicity stunt fundraiser that I have done over the past better than a decade for the food bank, the March for the Food Bank, which will come from Springfield here and go all the way to Greenfield over 2 days, Thanksgiving week, shameless plug. It was also an honor to be sitting behind Liz, who I know is doing this work day in and day out here in Springfield. And also I was sitting next to Kirsten Levitt, who's the executive chef and director of Stone Soup Cafe, which is the only hot meal available to everybody on the weekend in Franklin County. So to be with these people that are doing the work day in and day out was a true honor. To hear Hail to the Chief play and then to actually see the President of the United States was, it was overwhelming as somebody who's grown up in this country. What was really impressive to me, and Congressman McGovern comes on this March for the Food Bank every year, is that the President got a standing ovation as one would expect. But when Congressman McGovern was introduced, he got a thunderous and very long State of the Union address sized standing ovation, because I think they know how deep his commitment is to these issues, and everybody in that room knows how deep his commitment to those issues are, which put a little bit of a bee in my bonnet thinking, is this preaching to the choir? Are we all already doing this work all the time, and is this really just exercise in preaching to the choir? And then I thought, the choir needs to practice too. So even if it strengthens the resolve of the people that are already working on these issues, I think it is a great jumping off point. And it was great to hear the stories of people like New York City Mayor Eric Adams. It was great to hear the stories of Chef Jose Andres and the work that he's doing. I spoke with an economist who I just happened to be sitting next to in the conference, sitting behind Liz from Northwestern, and her perspective on it is that this could be something that reaches across the aisle. That economically speaking, it makes sense for things like the child tax credit to exist, where in a year when that was existing, childhood hunger was reduced by about 50% to the lowest levels on record, and that overall food insecurity was lowered to about a quarter of what it's at. So there are very achievable and attainable goals. I also was energized by how much focus there was on nutrition. A lot of times, it's just about, let's just get some type of food into people's bodies. But with this, and Senator Cory Booker had, I think, my favorite line in regards to that, we're going to put the F back in FDA. So instead of always talking about regulating drug prices, why not talk more about how we can get healthy food to people and go that avenue first, when 80 cents on the dollar for healthcare costs are going to things that theoretically could be alleviated, healed from better nutrition. Why don't we put more of a focus on that? So there were some really powerful moments, and it was great to be together in that setting.
We can feel the enthusiasm and the energy that you're bringing from that. Koby, you're lucky to be having a hero that you work for among us. One of the things, and obviously, please, kind of talk about his work on this, but also one of the things, and Liz brought it up. And I've always struck by this too. I mean, we're in Springfield, and I represent Holyoke. We understand Hampden County, right? We're going to hear from the president in just a moment. But these are the same issues we see in rural communities, right? Access to healthy food, access to food. And so as a congressman, he has to balance those out. And then when you look at Massachusetts, we have a lot of our urban centers, which we know have food insecurity issues, but so do these rural communities, and many of them in the congressman's district. So maybe you want to touch upon that.
Sure. So first of all, Liz and Monte, I want to say that on behalf of all of us here in Western Massachusetts, thank you for attending in person and for bringing that back to us here. I know we'll get more into this, but that is so impactful to me, and I know that this community as a whole. But as far as the question of urban and rural issues, as far as hunger and food insecurity go, I don't think anyone here in this room needs me to tell them that in rural settings, hunger and food insecurity can be just as bad, if not worse, than in urban settings. And part of the reason that the congressman organized this conference is because he believes that when we look at these issues of hunger and food insecurity and nutrition in America at the federal government level, that these are so siloed. And if you want to talk about transportation in rural areas and difficulty of access to food and food deserts and things of that nature, you're looking at the Department of Transportation. But if you want to talk about SNAP, then you're looking at the Department of Agriculture, or in Congress, the Agriculture Committee, that sort of thing. And so part of the reason he had this conference is to bring all of these players to the table to look more holistically at how we address hunger and food insecurity, not just in that siloed method that we've been doing, which has not been working, but as a more whole group, whole piece of the puzzle, as a whole puzzle, as opposed to just pieces of the puzzle. And that is important to bring agencies like the Department of Transportation, like Housing and Urban Development, directly together so that we kind of find better ways to work through these issues. And out of this conference, we have this document from the White House that includes, among other things, directives for those agencies for how we're going to address rural issues of hunger and food insecurity in a more impactful way than we have been doing.
That is great. And you bring up a really great point, Koby, of this cross-sector issue, right? And so we often say, if it's just a complicated issue, one or two people can figure it out, but these are complex issues. And I think looking at those crossover issues, when people think about community college, they're thinking great quality education at an affordable price to get me to a four-year university. They're not thinking about all the things that you and I have talked about for the last 10 years almost, or 8 years, about those other issues. And I know that HCC has done quite a lot in addressing food insecurity and food issues. And so maybe you want to touch a little bit upon that and any of your reactions from the document that the White House is presenting.
Well, first of all, I'm so glad that we have such a great representation in the state of Massachusetts, in particular Western Mass, and congressional leaders like Congressman McGovern to provide a perspective to the White House on these topics. I lead a community college in our region, and I think about education being such a fundamental topic. But when you talk about food access and affordability and healthy, nutritious food, I can't think of anything that's more fundamental than that, and the intersectionality across so many topics. Because if we're not focused on helping to provide access to food, access to healthy food, and focusing on the health and wellness and vitality of an individual, that has to be addressed before addressing all of the other challenges that we experience. I talk a lot about how it's difficult to educate a hungry student because you just look at the hierarchy of needs that come into play and how that affects so many individuals' ability to focus on and really concentrate on all the wonderful things that they want to do in life, including get a quality education. I was surprised even at my own institution to see how many students were food insecure and struggling with access to healthy food. And when we surveyed this topic, to find that half of our students surveyed had experienced food insecurity within the past 30 days. Many couldn't afford a balanced meal, and really just the difficulty of them in achieving the goals that they set out to. So when I think about, as a nation, how we really help our citizens set up for success, starting with our young folks, then we really need to look at what's on their plates and what they have access to in order to allow everything else to emerge from there.
Absolutely. Well said. And I think that these are no issues of, unknown issues to you at all at the food bank. And Christina, you and I have been working together for a long time. And I just wonder, when you see this happen, and I can just imagine your eyes lighting up when you get the call from the congressman's office saying, we're doing this conference that hasn't happened since 1969. And you're thinking, all right, what was that reaction to? And then the other thing maybe to touch upon, and maybe I'll have Liz follow up on this, but we're using a lot of terms out there and how they kind of relate, right? We've talked about food insecurity, food deserts. These are terms that maybe not everyone knows about. So maybe first a little bit about your reactions to the conference and obviously in the document that came out, and then maybe kind of explain some of these issues that we're sort of trying to address.
Sure. Well, my reaction to the conference was elation. I have been working with the congressman for a number of years, and it was years ago that he said to me, what we really need to do is have a White House conference on hunger. And I said, sounds great. And he's been talking about it ever since with me and about 12,000 other people. And he finally made it happen. And it's really exciting to see something like that happen. It was really encouraging to see him be able to push that forward. So we were just delighted. And I think part of the reason that we were so thrilled that this conference came to be is that it really brings the issue of hunger to the forefront, which happened a lot during the pandemic. All of a sudden, hunger was all over the news and all over the front page of our newspapers. But the fact of the matter is that hunger has existed since the beginning, and it continues every day. And it's a crisis that families face every day, not just when there's a pandemic. So it was really great to put it on a national stage, as this conference did. In terms of some of the issues we're talking about, I don't know that I'll be able to sum those up because there are so many, but one of the primary ones, and I'm going to let Liz talk about this as well, is food security, food insecurity, and hunger. Those are two phrases that we often use interchangeably. Technically, they mean different things. The federal government uses the term food insecurity to mean a specific situation that a family or an individual may find themselves in. But within the hunger advocacy world, we use those terms really interchangeably, for better or for worse. I'm not sure if we should, and I know that Liz has something to say about that. Food deserts are one of the issues that contribute to food insecurity and hunger. And those are areas where people do not have access to a grocery store that sells healthy food. So many food deserts are in urban areas where people may lack transportation and there's no good public transportation option. There are enormous swaths of the city of Springfield, for example, that lack reasonable access to a grocery store. So people have to depend on bodegas and other places that may carry very, very limited quantities of fresh food. And food deserts also exist in rural areas. And people who lack transportation in rural areas are really stuck because there is no public transportation in rural areas of Western Massachusetts for all intents and purposes. And so if there's no grocery store nearby, it's really, really hard to get access to healthy food. And there are a lot of farmers markets and farm stores and things in our area which we're so lucky to have, but that's not an everyday option for most people. Most of them happen once a week, and they happen during the summer and fall months. And so that's a great supplement for a lot of people, but it doesn't usually serve as people's primary source of fresh food, which they really need in order to be healthy, in order to do all the things that they want to do, as President Royal was just saying.
Absolutely, and I think that again, there's that cross-sector issue again, right? Just because you say, well, there's a farmers market in Holyoke on Race Street on Saturdays, just go. Well, if you live 30 blocks away and have 3 kids and don't have a car, how are you going to get there? So a shameless plug to the Holyoke Farmers Market and JR and his crew there. They've applied for grants to actually have a bus going around during farmers market times. They're trying to have they have a winter's market going on. So how do you make sure? And there's been a lot of farms that have those mobile markets now. I know we've worked with the Holyoke Housing Authority having mobile markets right where people live, so bringing that access to people. So Liz, isn't the answer just put a few more corner stores and a couple of fast food chains right in downtown? Is that going to solve the issue?
Wrong question to ask me. Don't act like you don't know me. There are so many things that I'm thinking about. And Christina, I really appreciate your explaining how those terms are used interchangeably. I am very intentional about rarely saying food insecurity anymore, because the people that I talk to will say my kids went to bed hungry last night, or I'm afraid my kids are going to go to bed hungry tonight. The people that I see on the street in Springfield who tap on my car window when I drive up certain streets say, do you have anything in your car that I can eat? They don't even ask for money anymore because I'm sort of known as like the food lady. So I drive around with lots of stuff in my car and they say I'm hungry. And so I'm not disregarding the value of food insecurity, but I want to be really clear. When I talk about hunger, I'm talking about hunger, and the pandemic did increase hunger. Christina is right, but the pandemic also taught us something that I've been saying for 15 years, that Unhealthy food is killing us, and disproportionately, it's killing people of color, Black and Latinx people. And COVID proved to me, not that I ever needed that lesson to be proved, but people who had diabetes and hypertension and cardiac disease suffer from inflammatory conditions, and COVID was inflammatory, and it basically set people on fire, and they were not savable. And we lost 2,000 people in Hampden County, like 2,000 people. And we lost them because of the pandemic, but we lost them in great part because they had been not having access to healthy food. Are bodegas the answer? I have an idea about bodegas. They need to be healthier. We've tried to build a big grocery store in Springfield. The level of economic will that is required by both our municipality and the big players in our town just wasn't there, and that's the bottom line. And these are people who are my friends, and I don't like to get in fights with, but we have to tell ourselves the truth. The other reality, something that you mentioned, and I'm going to refer to you as Representative Vega, because I always will till I'm no longer alive. Because you, like Jim McGovern, like Joe Comerford, like so many others in our state, really did represent and still do represent the people, and I'm really grateful for that. I mean, I don't know how many representatives can call the name of the farmer's market manager in their town, and JR is a rock star. But when I think about what we've done with HIP, the Healthy Incentives Program, which was piloted here in Springfield and in Holyoke by poor Black and brown people, and probably will be funded at $24 million in our state legislature next year. That's a powerful thing, and should people be able to use their HIP benefit, which enables them to buy additional fresh produce? Here's my shameless plug. Any person watching this who knows any person watching this, or knows anybody who has SNAP or Los Cupones or food stamps, you have an additional benefit that can bring anywhere from $40 to $80 in spending money just for fresh produce, local produce in your household. And you need to use it at the Holyoke Farmers Market, or, super shameless, at the Gardening Community Farm Store, which is open year-round. I said to someone this morning, could I go build another farm store in the North End? Probably. It'll cost so much money, but it would be so much more efficient if we made HIP available at bodegas and corner stores, where people recognize culturally relevant crops, and they could use that benefit blocks from their house instead of, as you note, trying to navigate to the farmer's market. And we just need to tell the truth about that, because we're really smart and we can solve these problems. And I chewed Senator Booker's ear, for a few minutes, talking about why can't we make HIP national, and why can't we raise the rates on school meal reimbursement? Because you talk about your students, and your students are my little babies that I spent so many years and still spend years advocating for free breakfast and lunch. And why didn't it occur to me that their big brothers and sisters needed access to healthy food? I got off the phone literally just before coming here talking to friends at STCC who have put together a response to student hunger. And these are deep, it seems like vast things, but I also don't think they're that vast. What Monte does every year is just really incredible, and I don't think it's ridiculous, and I think it's fantastic that you have a good time. While we're focusing on, it depends on the weather, I just have to tell you the truth. While we're focusing on really hard issues, but I'm struck by our friend Ron Johnson won't be with us on this walk, who was the former executive director of Martin Luther King Family Services, and Cynthia Mitchell, who never walked, but who was the founder of the Food Policy Council for Springfield, always cheered me on. We lost people, and we have a responsibility to them. And we have a responsibility not just to the cute little kids who attend our public schools, but to the cute big kids who attend our colleges, and to those people who we might not seem to think of as so cute, who are standing outside because they don't have a place to live. And folks at the food bank are figuring out, my friend Laura Sylvester, who brings so many of us together to talk about transportation, but I make connections with housing people there. And we come up with all sorts of strategies. I'm hoping that the pillars that we learned about at the conference, that we can chew on them ourselves, whether in our communities, in our regions, in our Commonwealth. And I'm waiting for the money to come flowing from the White House. But in the meantime, I'm using the connections that were reinforced while I was there and that I have every day here to come up with ideas. And I'm counting on our state and municipal leaders to support those ideas because we should crack this nut. And I say that as a person who descends from someone who was enslaved in this Commonwealth, because I can't talk about food without talking about race and land and all of those issues. And when we in Massachusetts can acknowledge that we were the first state to make slavery legal, and that there were enslaved people here, and that our farm system is built on the theft of land from indigenous people, it doesn't make us have to be like really bad, oh, we're terrible, horrible people, and I'm talking about the white people. But it can say, wow, that's what we come from, and we can hold that in this hand, and we can hold our solutions in this hand at the same time. And that's what I'm counting, not just on my friends on this panel, but anybody who's watching this and listening. You know, figure out your piece. I've been saying that, and I'm going to keep saying it until we get it figured out.
Absolutely, and sharing those stories and having stories of hunger in our families, in our own personal lives, and I think that's what keeps a lot of us up at night as parents, as brothers and sisters, just as humans, thinking about kids, actually going to sleep, hungry, right? Sometimes, some of us are probably, trying to have our kids not have a second dessert before they go to bed. Never mind, kids going home hungry, and I know that's what the congressman, I'm sure one of those things that keeps him up at night. Besides the world, but one of those real personal issues. What's in this bill a little bit? Do you want to dive a little bit like what are some of those pillars, or what are some of those aspirations and these goals perhaps within this bill? I'm sure the congressman was behind a lot of those.
Sure. So first of all, Aaron, you're absolutely correct to say that this is something that is front and center on the congressman's mind, this issue of students who are going to bed hungry. And I think one of the things that stuck out to me about this conference was when I heard some of our panelists at the White House conference saying that there are literally students who are being put into summer school, not because their teacher thinks they need to go to summer school, but because that is how they are going to get food through the summer. That is the only way that the teachers can be sure that they will get food through the summer. President Royal just mentioned a little while ago, how many of your students that you are hearing from who have this issue that they're dealing with, and you're absolutely right to say, how could you possibly learn well on an empty stomach? You can't, and that's something that we all should be ashamed of. We need to address it, and in our office, that's one thing that we've been looking at. We've been hearing from a lot of college students. We did roundtables in preparation for this White House conference, and one of the things we've heard from college students in particular is that even though there are benefits available, in many cases, they don't necessarily know that they're eligible for those benefits. That's something that as part of this plan, since you were asking, Aaron, part of this strategy document, more of a proactive outreach across colleges and across schools in general, as far as what can we do to make sure that students are aware that they may be eligible for benefits? Well, there are these checklists that some folks mentioned. I mean, if you can answer these three questions and you're checking off the yes column for all of them, you are probably eligible for SNAP benefits or other benefits. And then going that next step and saying, well, here's how we can connect you. Here's the resources that are out there. And that's just one point. But I mean, college hunger is something that Congressman McGovern has been working on. He introduced the College Hunger Act with Congressman Al Lawson from Florida. That's something we're still working on. And I mean, in addition to the White House document that we've all been talking about, that there's the opportunity to include a number of these issues as legislation that we're introducing in the upcoming Farm Bill as we begin to work on that. That is a place where we are definitely looking to target our efforts and to try and include as much as possible going forward. And part of doing that effectively is to capitalize on what we've heard in the White House conference, but also to continue to hear from our constituents right here at home, starting with the colleges in our area, the schools in our area. I should mention that the congressman also has sisters who teach in the public education system and hears a lot about their students there as well. And I mean, this may be getting a bit off the question that you actually asked, but when we were talking about issues of food access, part of the other thing we need to talk about, especially in schools, is that even if you had access to that food, that's not to say every school necessarily has a functional kitchen. That's not necessarily to say that every school has the capacity for refrigeration to store that food long term, and that really limits the amount of fresh produce you're able to serve, or the choices you even have, because oftentimes if you don't have either of those things, you're looking at more heavily processed but easier to store foods, and that's certainly not doing us any favors on good nutrition. And there's more I could go into on that, but I think that's certainly something we need to be cognizant of as we look to address these issues and kind of devise those solutions. And then once we do identify ways to do so, how we implement those solutions matters a lot as well.
Absolutely. I think that one of the things, we hear a lot, we talk a lot about capacity. And I think that we're thankful that, something like HIP that was piloted in Springfield and Holyoke. I remember I was the city council when that got piloted. I thought it was an amazing idea. And now it's gone to fruition. But too often these things start with a little bit of a grant money and then they disappear. Here's, let's start something. We had a grant money for a little while to address that very issue, Koby, with bodegas, to get them a refrigeration unit, right? But then the money runs out. And it's not advantageous for a bodega to order, one crate of apples when a grocery store is ordering dozens and dozens of crates, right? It's like, how do we make that economy of scales? But when you look at the capacity issue and you look at all the programs that the food bank is involved in, and you think, if we could just make this one stick, we've seen it have impact, we've seen it make results, but it goes away because of funding, it goes away because of capacity issues. How frustrating is that, and where do you see that this maybe new attention may help some of that? Do you think more funding will come to codify and solidify some of the programs that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. We definitely feel that frustration in terms of the capacity of our system to carry out these programs in the long term. And, one thing that Congressman McGovern always says is, we know what we need to do. We know how to do this stuff. It's been happening across the country in small places. We just need the political will to actually do it. So in my mind, political will often translates to money. And we need the political will to set the budget that includes money for these kinds of programs. An example is the child tax credit. That was overhauled during the pandemic, and it benefited people tremendously. It dropped child food insecurity by half in a year, and then it went away. And so we need to get that back. I mean, some of these are really simple solutions. I'm not saying they're cheap necessarily, but they're simple. And, putting money in the pockets of people who need it is the best solution there is. So that's one thing I would say. And the other is that I am hoping that the increased attention that this conference brought to some of the creative and innovative things that are going on will bring some funding with it. Primarily from the federal government. I think it just needs to be said that there is no charity in the country that can fund anything on the scale that the federal government can. And so that's what really needs to happen. But in addition to that, I think there are a lot of philanthropies that do fund these kinds of projects. And I think increasing their understanding about the impact of the money that they're able to provide, and perhaps increasing their understanding of the timeline that some of these projects need in order to get off the ground and to build sustainability and to be able to support themselves. It's longer than 3 years in most cases. Mm-hmm. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of relationship building. It takes a lot of trust building, and those things take time. You can't just call somebody up on the phone and say, hey, we're getting a grant from XYZ Foundation. Do you want to help us with it? Well, if I've never met that person on the other end of the phone, why would they say yes to that? So there are a lot of aspects to implementing these various grant programs, and funding, I think, it needs to be a little bit more flexible, I think, in order to be able to accommodate the experience of those of us trying to put these things into place on the ground. And there are gazillions of local organizations, in some cases very small, extremely grassroots organizations that are doing just really tremendous work and need all the support that they can get. And they need that support to be flexible so that they can do what they have the expertise to do and the know-how to do. They just need the financial backing in order to be able to do it.
Absolutely. I think that you touch upon those relationships. It makes all the difference. Applying for those grants is never easy. Administering those grants is not easy. Much of the work we do in our office is grant-based. But, we talk about those local organizations, talked about outreach, and, I think that, Monte, you can call it the publicity stunt, but that march brings awareness and it brings education. The people you meet along that march, and you've been doing that a lot in your show for a long time, highlighting a lot of these local organizations. What does outreach look like to you to educate people about this issue, about this? You're a food justice warrior, and so what is that? When people don't understand this, how do you educate them on this?
I think it's through stories and hearing people's stories. And what was really good about the conference is they had a bunch of people there with lived experience talking. A lot of times it's a think tank. It's people at the upper echelon trying to solve the problems of the people that need their problems solved. This had many more of those voices included, both in the listening sessions that happened in advance and at the conference itself. We were all hearing from those voices throughout the course of the day. So initially, the food bank march that I do started in Northampton and went to Greenfield, which is essentially the listening area of my radio station, the Holyoke Range. We call it the tofu curtain for a lot of reasons, but it also is an actual physical barrier to an FM signal. But the more I learned about food insecurity, the more I knew that we had a racial problem in regards to this, and that the people north of the tofu curtain, it's easy to forget about Springfield and Holyoke and Chicopee and these places. So I wanted to start in Mason Square so that I could bring the stories of the people as we walk through those neighborhoods to the airwaves and tell those stories and hopefully change the hearts and minds of some of those people. And I hope that there will be people that heard some of these stories at the White House conference and will be affected in that way. And then on the other end of things, when it comes to just the sheer economics of it, as Christina said, that child tax credit eviscerated hunger in the best way, halved it in a year. That's real data that people who are worried about data can take and say, we know this works. That Northwestern economist that I was sitting next to says efficiency is really a key buzzword when it comes to trying to reach across the aisle. They want programs that are efficient. SNAP is efficient. And if we were to take SNAP and, as Liz said, expand it to a HIP-style SNAP program across the country, it would be remarkable. We know that money gets back into the economy and does remarkable things. So if we can, a lot of blame falls on one particular Democratic senator for ending the child tax credit. But as Pete Buttigieg just said over the last couple weeks, there were no Republicans who supported this. If we could just change the hearts and minds of a few people in regards to this, and we have the resources. Jo Comerford, senator, was at the conference. She used to work at the food bank. She also used to work at the National Priorities Project, which crunches the federal budget numbers. A very small amount of the money that we said perhaps spent on a plane for the United States military could theoretically alleviate this and implement the child tax credit. Isn't there one person on that side of the aisle that can see, let's give it a try at least and see how it goes? And I believe maybe that person exists.
Well, we hope, right? We started off talking about hope. I think you mentioned being hopeful, and that's key. And I think, we talk about the HIP benefits also. I think one of the things is figuring out how does that program, how can we use it at the grocery store? If people are going to the grocery stores, why is it not being able to be used at the grocery store? I think I was actually at a meeting before this as well, talking about the CHNA, another acronym for us, right? But the Community Health Needs Assessment. And so what are those informations? And there's still the underutilization of HIP. Well, because you can't use it at the grocery store where people are actually going, and there are fruits and vegetables there, so why can't we make that happen?
Rep Vega, if I could, and I have to dash, so this is why I'm going to jump in. We tried to launch HIP in the grocery stores. It's one of the reasons that we weren't able to move the major grocery store in Mason Square, even after the committee working on that had established site control. Grocery stores didn't want it. They said, well, you people don't eat produce, and it's going to be too cumbersome. And that's not anything, Monte, I saw your, but Christina's not surprised by this. It's one of the reasons that farmers markets, it's been really hard to pull off in places like Holyoke and Springfield. Holyoke is successful because of the farmers who learned how to farm at New Oyster Soy-Uses, and that's who supplies the farmers markets. They are the people who look like, they are Latinx and they look like the community. And those are just some of the hard sort of underlying truths about racial equity that we need to tell. HIP is at $24 million next year because the ag community recognized we're losing a lot of money by not participating in this. White farmers got excited about HIP, and suddenly everybody wants a piece of it, and there were people knocking at the door to become authorized vendors, because all of a sudden, maybe those people are eating vegetables, and not just people who look like me. I know a little bit about rural poverty because I knew that kids, when I was working on school food so diligently, that those young people, those children, were as hungry as the kids in Springfield. And I said to their mothers, it's not your fault that your kids go to school hungry. And I meant it. And the solution is that we do have to reach across the aisle, and we have to reach across racial lines. Let's just tell the truth. Poor white people who live in the hill towns of Massachusetts need to know that Black people aren't getting a bigger welfare check, that we're not getting more food stamps, that that's all established. And Christina, you said it's not cheap, but neither is health care. So it is cheap. It's cheaper to feed people good, nutritious food and keep them healthy and keep kids in school and matriculating post-high school to secondary institutions and then moving into sustainable wage-paying jobs. That is a lot cheaper than taking care of the numbers of sick people that we have to take care of. Thanks so much. And I'm sorry to leave. I have child pickup because when you work at a small nonprofit, you don't make enough money to hire somebody to go pick your kid up
No,
from school.
Liz, thank you for your time, and I know you'll be no stranger. I know that we'll get all this information out there. And Christina, I want to come to you. You know, I know you've been doing a lot of work on equity, and also it just makes me feel like maybe you can bring this back to the Congressman too. I feel we might need a FARPA, a Food American Rescue Plan Act bill out there. I mean, because the government recognized that we need a rescuing after the COVID, and you know, money's pouring into the community and into these states like never before. You maybe aren't seeing it, but how do you continue this conversation at the level of other college presidents as a community leader in Holyoke and in Western Mass? How do we make sure that this continues to be at the forefront?
Well, I want to really echo one of Liz's points, which is about proactivity. If we invest appropriately in our communities, including access to food and reducing hunger and changing the policies that impede that, then we have an opportunity to really set our citizens up for success. And I do believe that everyone wants to be successful. And so, you know, at the community college, one of the reasons why it's important to look at the community college landscape is because when you look at the students who are being educated through the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and quite frankly, across the nation in other states as well, community colleges and public higher education educate the majority of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color. So our students are our communities. And when I started in 2017, one of the things that I started was the President's Student Emergency Fund as a way for us to be able to eliminate the bureaucracy of issues that came up and give somebody an opportunity to petition to something where there was a short turnaround time, that their application literally just asks for a paragraph explanation of what you're going through instead of a long form. And then the second is that we cut a check within 24 hours. So there isn't waiting for weeks, which you can't afford to if you are truly in a crisis. Among the top 3 issues that we have people petition this fund for, food is among the top 3. And so it's important to look at that. The second thing is looking at how we change policy, fundamentally change policy. So one of the things, and this is where it's important that we engage our constituents in the conversation. We have a lot of people, including myself, in prestigious positions, and I also was food insecure, but talking to people who are impacted right now is really important. We had a student who started the conversation to say, why can't I use my SNAP benefits on the college campus in our store? And it was like this idea that we're like, this is right in front of us. Why? So we started working with the federal government and the USDA to be able to what we became, the first community college and first public institution in the state of Massachusetts to offer and accept SNAP EBT benefits at our college store. I don't want us to just be the first. I want us to set the example for and have this become commonplace at all of the 15 community colleges within our state. But this is what I mean about identifying ways and bringing the constituents into the conversation so that we can figure out ways that we can shift policy and practice. And ultimately, that's how we start to make change. I get frustrated sometimes too with the vastness of this topic across the nation, in our state, and in our local communities. But it requires all of us and those dedicated to this topic to chip away at this problem in the most substantial ways that we can. And so looking for those solutions is really how we start to change the conversation and set a model for the nation.
This panel's so amazing because they've basically gone through all the questions without me having to ask them. We've been working together for a while. So as we kind of in this part of the conversation, because we could talk about this all day, and I hope that the viewers understand that this is really just the tip of the iceberg, and that there's ways for you to be involved. A couple last things I want to maybe touch upon. There's a lofty goal, quote unquote, to end hunger by 2030, but it's not to end. There's a reality to what that means. So maybe just a little bit more about what are some of the goals or aspirations, and then I think we've talked a lot about how Massachusetts is already a leader in this. And Monte, you've had all these legislators on. We've talked about breakfast after the bell. We've talked about, increasing MFAP, right? I mean, all these things that we're doing in Massachusetts. Once again, we're doing a lot of the right things. The community colleges, all the organizations, the policymakers. But what are some of those goals maybe from what does ending hunger by 2030 really mean in this document? And then we can kind of maybe transition to kind of wrap up, like, what are we looking at as we go forward? How can we do things locally? Because, again, the tax credit, which you mentioned, and, everyone knows that the people that are going to be impacted by that kind of money are spending it locally, right? And so they're not buying new boats. They're not traveling to the Cayman Islands, right? That money stays local. So maybe a little bit more about what are some of the goals of the document, and what are we doing here in Massachusetts? I don't know, Koby, or you can go ahead.
Well, I just want to dovetail on what you were saying about what we do here in Massachusetts. First of all, you should be recognized because you were a huge advocate for breakfast after the bell. We all worked together on getting that message out, and that was a success. And that is an important piece of the puzzle of making sure, especially kids, have enough to eat. Now our state legislators have passed universal free meals. That's remarkable. That's only a small part of the Biden administration's plan, and Massachusetts is already doing it kind of bigger and better than the ambitious plan that the Biden administration has. I was there covering a lot of what our Western Mass delegation was doing and learning about while we were there with Representative Mindy Dahm, with Senator Joe Comerford. I also was hanging out with other representatives from other parts of the state, Hannah Kane, Andy Vargas, Sal DiDomenico. They're all part of the caucus in Massachusetts that worked towards that. And yet, when we were all informally chatting with Chef Jose Andre at the end, they were very proud to tell him that Massachusetts had passed these universal free meals. And he said, "I'm not going to clap for you. You're just doing your job." And that was really true. Now, if we took those jobs seriously, if more legislators took their jobs as seriously as you did, as these legislators do, with these things that are proven to work, I think we really can do it. And that's just our job.
It's just a job. And how does it affect everyday people? And these are real policies.
Right. So, I mean, I just want to go back to as far as affecting everyday people, go back to the child tax credit, because I really believe that is so important. I mean, as my colleagues here have said, it reduced child poverty rates by half in a year. And I mean, in my view, addressing child poverty rates is something that we can really do to tackle ending hunger, because these are financial strains that are really being put on working families who just need some sort of relief. And well, part of what I think about when I think of that issue is that we literally have across the country millions of people who are being forced out of the workforce for childcare, and a majority of these are women, and that's not right. We need to address that. And I mean, bigger picture, that issue also plays into at a time when we already have a bit of a labor shortage, you have jobs that are not being filled as easily, and if you can't fill those job openings, you have employers who struggle to grow their businesses, and that all plays into our economic growth or lack of growth, and that's something that we can do, is extend the child tax credit. I mean, we don't need too many votes to do it. We just need a few, but that has been a tough sell for a number of reasons. And as we work at that, just on the subject of Massachusetts being a leader, I mean, Congressman McGovern down at the White House conference shared with many of his federal colleagues the success that we've seen in this state of the HIP program, and has been advocating for that to be a model that other states and nationally that we use going forward. One other thing I wanted to mention is that Western Mass, as I'm sure folks here know, was home to the pilot that was the Federal Nutrition Incentives Program, which funds Double Up Bucks. That's something we can build on. We are sharing, lessons learned here in Massachusetts, and I think that it was already mentioned, but school meals across the country, that is something that I do believe USDA is paying attention to, and as I mentioned, we are going to push for that to be included in the upcoming farm bill that we have, and programs like that. I mean, they go a long way towards informing this national strategy and towards what priorities we're going to focus on.
That's great. And I think, as you've heard today, even thinking about, those grants that address infrastructure, right? Because even in Holyoke, not all the schools actually cook food at the cafeterias, right? That's getting brought in. And again, if you've got you're cooking food at 10 o'clock in the morning, you've got to last till 1 o'clock in the afternoon, right? You're not getting always the healthiest choices. So think about how can there be infrastructure grants for either bodegas to have cooling systems, for bulk purchasing, for small places to be able to buy fruits and vegetables so it doesn't break the bank. But Massachusetts isn't stopping, right? Because we got breakfast at the Bell, we're doing universal lunches, but we know there's more to do. And what are some of the things that we're looking at doing here on the horizon?
Yeah, we've got big plans. But I just want to echo what Koby and Monte were saying about, Massachusetts already being a leader in this area. Massachusetts, as far as I could tell, is the only state that's mentioned in the White House plan. And a lot of that, of course, has to do with the fact that Congressman McGovern was the organizer of this, and yet I think it was a well-deserved placement because we are doing a lot of the things that we need to do. As the Congressman says, again, we know what to do. We just need to keep doing it. So some of the specific things that we have on tap for the state of Massachusetts are to expand the universal free school meals bill. That is in place for this current school year, but really needs to be made permanent going forward. So that's one thing. Another thing is a hunger-free campus bill that is currently in front of the legislature and would provide grant funding for public colleges and universities across the state to implement anti-hunger programming on their campus. And that could mean a wide variety of different things. Each campus is a little bit different in its own community. So there needs to be some latitude there. And so that's all built into this bill that would really, I think, start to address this major epidemic that we're seeing on college campuses now of hungry kids who aren't able to learn. And one other thing is there's a cliff effect bill in front of the legislature as well. So the cliff effect, just very quickly, is when you are receiving public benefits and you get a job or you get a promotion and you're earning just a little bit more money, those benefits get cut back or go away altogether. So you end up, in many cases, being worse off economically than you were before you got the job or the promotion. And so any rational person would not take that job or that promotion, and if they do, they're doing it at tremendous sacrifice. So there's a bill in place right now that we've been working on quite a lot, and that is to start a pilot program that would use the earned income tax credit to kind of backfill those benefits that are lost by families. And so that they wouldn't experience that cliff and could, in fact, build up a little bit of savings so that when they do lose their benefits, they've got a teeny bit of a cushion to rely on. So I think that's one of those kind of structural changes that really needs to be made and I think would make a big difference. And finally, another thing that I'm seeing in Massachusetts that I hope will become more prominent across the country and was talked about extensively at the conference is the connection between healthcare and nutrition and food security. And that's becoming more and more widespread. It seems like a no-brainer, but for many years it hasn't been. And the food bank, for example, is participating in a program that is funded by health insurance companies. And so they are actually providing money now for community organizations to provide services to patients who are found to be food insecure, and to deal with kind of the social determinants of health, because we know now that healthcare is not just about medicine, it's about a lot of other things as well. So those are several things that are going on in Massachusetts and have either recently started or are still trying to get to the starting line that we're doing a lot of work on. And but I think, Massachusetts has been a leader, and we can continue to be a leader in this area. And we just need to kind of keep our eyes on the ball.
I think so. I think we have the political will. I just want to thank everybody for being here today and taking time to talk about this important conversation. And, when it comes to the Cliff Bill, I think it's called transitional assistance. And it's supposed to be transitioning people upward, not bringing them back downward. So you're not going to take a $1 raise if you're going to lose your $800 child care voucher, right? I mean, it's just putting things in perspective. Keep that voucher and take the dollar. Get yourself to a better place. So many great topics everyone talked about. I do want to end back with Monte just one more time to. I don't consider it a shameless plug. It is exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about the outreach. We're talking about supporting the food bank of Western Mass. Once again, talk just a little bit, the dates of your walk coming up.
It's Thanksgiving week, Monday and Tuesday, November 21st and 22nd. There's a website through the food bank, montesmarch.com. You can sign up and start a team. You can support a team that already exists. You can virtually march, and you can listen throughout the course of those 2 days where we share these stories from the neighborhoods we go through. I mean, as you heard Liz say, there's a lot of stories in Mason Square and Springfield, but there's a lot of rural stories when we get up 43 miles north closer to Deerfield and Greenfield, and those stories may move you to take action. And this is a solvable problem, and there's a really good plan on the table if we can get enough political will behind it.
Absolutely, and I think it's important for people to recognize they don't have to join you for the whole 43 miles.
Right.
They
In
can
and out.
They can jump on.
Only a few crazy people do the whole thing, like Congressman Jim McGovern.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's also important, I think, for all of us to realize and recognize that for those of us that have the means, donations obviously to your local organizations are important, but it's sometimes the message and the meaning of what that means to you. A $5 donation to someone who's gone through food insecurity, that maybe got that first job, who's moving off transitional assistance, who recognizes the impact, that's a meaningful donation. To someone that can make those 500 and extra digit donations, that's great, but it's all of us together. And I think that's what we've come together for here. So thank you for your time. Thank you to our panel. And we look forward to working with all of you to continue this conversation and continue working on the solutions.